Roll call, please.
Representatives, please state your name for the record when I call the taxing district you represent. City of DeKalb.
Bill Nicholas.
DeKalb Public Library.
Emily Faulkner.
DeKalb Township.
Jennifer Jeep Johnson.
DeKalb Township Road and Bridge District.
Craig Smith.
DeKalb Community Unit School District 428.
Jamie Craven.
DeKalb County Forest Preserve. DeKalb County.
Gary Hansen.
DeKalb Park District.
Amy Dahl.
Kishwaukee Water Reclamation District.
It is a mouthful. Mark Eddington.
Kishwaukee College.
Bob Johnson.
Public Member.
Tim Hayes.
Thank you.
Do we have any public participation? Any cards?
None.
Moving on to item D. We have continued discussion of the Joint Review Board composition. Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your background has some proposals for you, a couple of options. There's a little bit of an explanation of who's actually got a voting authority and who doesn't, and if we have any questions on that, we could start with that, and if not, we can move into the options.
I do want to say I was you and I talked a little bit about this because I read this and it confirmed what I think I had been thinking before, which is that the library is not a district, so we are not a voting member.
Right.
And when I discussed it with my board on Wednesday night, they suggested that perhaps it wouldn't be appropriate for me to be coming to all of the meetings of the JRB since we don't have a voice or a vote, particularly.
Well, you have a voice.
We have a voice, no vote though.
Yeah. If depending on which option, if we decide we want to continue a working group, a certain number of the scripted meeting times, and yeah, you definitely have a vote. Or not a vote, but a voice. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it plays out. But they indicated that they would prefer I pay attention, but maybe not participate as much.
Other thoughts of option 1 and 2 that Bill provided in our preview of the minutes or of the agenda?
On option 1, the working group option, we'd have our annual meeting, which would be the normal official one.
Mm-hmm.
Would the working groups that met quarterly be televised and announced and all of that? Okay.
Bob?
I would concur with option 1. I think everybody's got some stake in the game, whether they have a vote or not. Why not have them participate?
Any other thoughts on this matter? I know this ties into Chapter 37, what is it, section, or 3703F. That's pretty much how it was laid out, that all of the taxing bodies would be invited to participate. The annual meeting that would be our January meeting, which is the voting meeting, that would only then be by those who are statutorily named.
For clarification purposes, because we're just reviewing financial documents, I'm just trying to anticipate what, if any, official vote would be taken, and I assume it would be to either accept the report or something like that.
Ask.
Anything else?
Basically be asking questions of the report, so the financial reports will also be given to the council, and it's something that we're already doing in the sense of regular monthly bills to be paid and so forth, but not as a separate report that highlights the TIF expenses. I should mention that Terry Hannon is in the audience, and he might want to come up to the table.
I prefer the bleachers.
Thank you, Bill. Good to see you, T.
You too.
Well, if there's no other discussion on item D, is there a motion to accept option 1 as has been discussed?
I would make a motion to accept option 1 as been discussed.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, aye.
Oh, may I just say, this might be an opportunity for us to practice the votes, the people who vote.
Okay. Could we have roll call, please?
Ruth, do you know which are in the JRB and which are not?
I do not.
Basically, we're voting to approve what's already in chapter 37.
Yeah.
So we can vote, but
Okay.
it's already been approved by the council.
Bill Nicholas,
Yes.
Jennifer Keefe Johnson,
Yes.
Jamie Craven,
Yes?
Gary Hansen,
Yes.
Bob Johnson,
Yes.
Tim Hayes,
Yes.
6 aye.
And DeKalb Park District.
Oh, I apologize. DeKalb Park District,
Yes.
7 aye.
Motion passes. Moving on to E, continued discussion of TIF surplus options involving TIF 1 and TIF 3.
I brought this back because I know from just reading the media accounts that some boards have been discussing this, and thought it'd be a good time for us to share information.
I will share that we discussed at the last school board meeting everything that was presented at the last JRB meeting involving TIFs 2, 1, and proposed TIF 3, which is now, I believe, the City Council has moved on. The board gave consensus that what was proposed, how we left the last meeting, the board was in agreement with. And mainly that was that we would not pursue at this time the school district wouldn't pursue a surplus agreement in TIF 3.
We discussed at our county executive committee, there was consensus as well to prefer the early termination of TIF 1 as in exchange for not doing the surplus in TIF 3. There's still concern of the projects approved very late, last minute on TIF 2, and feel strongly that that maybe at least the hotel project or part of that should be turned over to TIF 1 and leave some additional monies into TIF 2.
In our conversation, the town board was generally in favor of things that streamlined the process and made things more simple and more accessible. Did not express a strong opinion in either direction, but generally said that they would wait for the city to decide the best course of action regarding TIF, and expressed a desire to kind of remain at arm's length on the issue, but generally speaking, seemed to favor foregoing surplus in TIF 3.
Our board doesn't meet until next Tuesday, but our exec committee met in the interim since our last meeting, and so we had a conversation, didn't take any action, but also are in agreement, in general agreement, that this seems like a simpler approach. I don't know if you've done Bill, if you've done a net present value of the stream of revenue that might be in TIF 3.
We can do that. Yep.
I'm just curious. I would guess, I didn't try to set one up,
Yeah.
but I would guess that we would, in net present value, it'd be pretty close.
Yeah.
Depending on what you use for
Right.
discount rate.
Right. We'll do that.
At the Park District meeting, it was discussed as well, and there was a general consensus of support, along with the other governing bodies as they've spoken, for not pursuing a surplus or an intergovernmental agreement, but having support for the city's consideration of ending TIF 1 early.
The Forest Preserve Commissioners, who are part of the county board, follow Gary's recommendation.
Sancerre District met yesterday, and similar to the other folks here, are prepared to follow suit.
The library board didn't express an opinion on this one, so.
Okay. So the general consensus is to take the recommendation from the previous meeting that we encourage the city to end TIF 1 early. And at this point, we're not going to pursue an intergovernmental agreement or surplus share agreement in TIF 3.
All right, I'll carry that message to the council. The mayor's here and serve that. Also, with respect to the county's position, of course, the 145 FISC is still something that is in the conceptual stage, and there's more work to do, and we'll follow that and see where that ends up, and certainly report on the progress of that consideration.
Bill, is there any other items that need to be covered under item E? Any other?
No, not on E, thank you.
I have a question. In your notes underneath this little box of TIF 3 surplus, TIF 2, could you explain what you mean by the last sentence, for the purpose of making projection revenue calculated half of FY 2022 revenue split pro rata? I'm not sure I understand that.
Let me read it. There's about 3 thoughts in there, Bob. I think I've written that clearer. So,
you mind if I
yes.
read that for those who wonder what we're talking
Yeah.
about? It says, for the purpose of making a projection, the fiscal year 2022 revenue was calculated as 1/2 of FY 2022 revenue, split pro rata by each taxing district's share of the total property tax bill.
Yeah. Reading back into my own mind at the time, a state of mind at the time, Your Honor, one thing, so we have a revenue sharing agreement now, which was going to commit to 50-50. And so what I was trying to do is back into what it would be if we shut that down. So that money's not going out, plus there's 50% in the fund, and that's all being combined and cashed out. That was the intent, just to make sure that the 22 is identified as that's the last, that would be the new last year rather than 23. So some revenue would be accrued into 23, but just as with the termination of TIF 2.
So essentially, we were already agreed to 50%, so
Yes.
this amounts to the
Yes.
other 50%.
That's correct.
Can you say that again?
If there was a surplus sharing already in place for 50%, then
We'd be
if
adding
already
on
we're
top
going to
of
get
that.
that, we would get the other 50% by terminating TIF a year
So
earlier.
it's 100% of the last year that we'd be.
Not 100% of the 7.3, 100% of the 3.6.
Right.
Okay. Okay. What happened, just out of curiosity, I know that there's a share agreement and it's projected at 7.3 million, and 1/2 of that amount is surplus. What happens to the other half?
Projects. I mean,
Okay.
currently.
Yes.
Presumably.
Presumably.
And if we
it
don't
doesn't-
have projects over a 3-year period, then that gets surplused as well under the TIF Act.
Okay.
Which is part of the reason why in the termination of 2, we identified a couple projects, but the rest had to be surplused.
Okay. Other questions?
Gary, I had a question, clarification. You mentioned the Fisk project in TIF 3, or possibly taking part of that hotel project and putting it in TIF 3?
TIF 1.
Oh,
TIF
TIF
1.
1, okay. Never mind then.
Okay.
Do we need action then on item E?
I think I heard a consensus, and at this point, it's not been up to the council as consideration yet, and that would be part of the background report in informing the council of where the JRB stands on this general idea. Then we'd have, I guess this gets us to the next agenda item, is how often we want to meet. If the working group was, if we weren't going to have another meeting until what would be in the new schedule, the first quarterly meeting of the year, that would be sometime in April. At that point, we'll have more information on this, and we'll have the ability for the JRB piece of the working group to take a vote if they wanted to.
So in the notes that you provided for us, we were talking about quarterly meetings, and your recommendation is to schedule them when the expense and revenue reports would be ready, and those dates would be April, July, October, and January.
Correct, and I suggested toward the end of those months, so we'd have a couple weeks. Some expenses are still being calculated, bills are being paid, invoices are being sent, and so forth. Just as with any of you, when you close a month or you close a quarter or close the annual fiscal year, you give yourself a few weeks to come up with the end total. So that's what I was proposing here. I don't know if the last week of the month conflicts with meetings of your boards. And
2 o'clock on Friday doesn't.
no. So if you wanted to do that, then we could lock that in. We could send a schedule to everybody. You could make note of it.
And how often can we consistently get people together? Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock seems to have, we've found a sweet spot. So
Can I just add, would moving it up a half hour be a problem for anybody as opposed
To
It's kinda
1:30,
like
1:30.
right in the middle there?
Or if
Yeah,
you had
right.
it at noon, and
Or-
the city could provide lunch.
Yeah.
Second that motion.
I don't know if that would be a qualified TIF expense.
Qualified TIF expense.
Oh, which one will be the annual meeting? I'm not sure when.
What's proposed is that would be the end of our fiscal year, so we'd have our fiscal year-end numbers by the last week in January.
So would, you asked a half an hour, would 1 o'clock work? Okay. So the motion would be for quarterly meetings of the TIF working group, meeting to be held the 4th week of April, July, October, and January, with the annual JRB meeting being held at the January meeting.
Correct.
Is there a motion? Or
So move.
is there a second?
Second.
We'll roll call this, please.
Bill Nicholas,
Yes.
Jennifer Keefe Johnson,
Yes.
Jamie Craven,
Yes.
Gary Hansen,
Yes.
Amy Dahl,
Yes.
Bob Johnson,
Yes.
Tim Hayes,
Yes.
7-0.
And with that, we'll move to an adjournment. But I just want to say thank you to all of the representatives of the taxing bodies. You know, we've kind of had a rough several months wrestling with this, and to be able to come here and have a 20-minute meeting talking about some very important topics is it's pretty good. So again, thank you for everybody. I know there's been a lot of work, you know, behind the scenes with boards and you know, with each other. And again, thank you.
Yes.
Before we adjourn, just a question on the status of the audit.
Yes. So the RFP is out. It's being circulated, and we'll know a couple weeks what the response is, and the responses are going to the state's attorney's office, and they'll let us know, and then we'll bring that as an information item to the council when it's done. And we're planning on getting that going in April in the large conference room out here and move through it. I just want to tag on to what Jamie said. Yes, thank you all. A lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of goodwill, dedication to trying to find consensus and common ground. That's what we've been appointed and elected to do, and I'm very proud to have been part of that process.
With that, we do not have any other business, so can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
We stand adjourned at 2:21.